Good afternoon. Welcome to the Hirshberg Entrepreneurship Enterprise webinar. We will begin our webinar in about 5 minutes. Thank you for joining us. We will begin our webinar in about 3 minutes. Thank you for joining us. We will begin our webinar in about 1 minute. Welcome to the Hirshberg Entrepreneurship Institute's webinar series, Yes We Can, Perspectives and Strategies for Success in 2021. Today's webinar is Navigating Costco and Thrive with James Wren from Thrive Market and Jeremy Smith from Launchpad, who will be talking about Costco. Today, we will be utilizing the Q&A function. You'll see that at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, this window will pop up. Just input your question on the bottom, hit send, and your question will be going right straight to our panelists. We will also be using the chat, but if you could just use the chat for any technical questions or anything you might like to share with the other attendees, feel free to do that. But if you have any questions for our panelists, please use the Q&A. And now Gary will introduce an opportunity for the HEI community. Gary, you're muted. Let's see.
Sorry. Thank you, Carlene, and welcome back, everybody. This is I'm very excited about today's webinar. We've never had either of these two firms represented at our series, so I know a lot of you are eager to get right to it. So I will. I just want to remind you all, this series is sponsored by New Hope Network. Grateful for their support. And of course, I'm joined by Bob Burke, who everybody here knows is going to be the co-moderator with me. As Carlene mentioned, we have been now for several weeks providing opportunities for members of the HEI community to give a 5-minute pitch of a service or product that could be beneficial to all of us. And today, I'm very pleased to have Pablo Munoz Lido, who I've known for many years, is a real, very entrepreneurial guy. Pablo and his colleague Doris, who's been a regular attendee at our webinars, our lead Look Into. It's the first digital storytelling, story sharing platform using AI and blockchain, veritable transparency to create deep customer engagement through purpose-driven stories. In my language, because I understand only about half of that. Pablo is, Stonyfield, we built our success on telling our story, on closing that gap between the consumer and the producer. And Pablo has developed a very, really unusual, very robust way of helping brands to do that. So, and in the interest of full disclosure, I was an early backer of Pablo's, so don't want people to find that out later and wonder what I'm doing here. But again, I do want to remind you before Pablo takes the mic, if you do have an offering or a service, as you'll see at the end, we have 3 more webinars remaining in this series before we go to our Spring Institute. And we've got 2 slots still available if you've got a product or service you'd like to share. So with that, Pablo, let me give you the mic.
Thank you, Gary. And thanks for having me here. And it's a pleasure. And let me take this opportunity to tell you a little bit about Into. So yes, like Gary said, Into is a platform that we created because we felt that, first of all, story and where products come from, how they are affecting, how products affect people and planet is in every consumer's mind, and now more than ever. After COVID and the sort of shift in consciousness that we have all experienced, people now want to be a part of the solution, not the problem. And there's no way to understanding how you are affecting people on planet unless you can have this kind of story. We wanted to make these stories immediately available through products or any other trigger image, and using your basically smartphones when you are in a physical world. When you are in a digital world, Into also has a universal embeddable widget which carries these same stories in any sort of digital application. So basically, we created a tool for you and your company as a storyteller to very quickly and very easily, intuitively create digital stories. Digital stories can have images, can have maps, video, audio, and you put all of these resources together in a very simple, swipeable story that comes at every time anyone points their smartphone at your product or any other trigger image, or clicks on the widget that can be embedded in any web device or any web connected resource. We also prepared all your stories to be shared by any other way of distribution, omni-channel, we call this. So they can be shared in social media, they can be heard in smart speakers. Once you create your story in the Into platform, they are widely available. The other thing that can be very interesting, both for story viewers, consumers, and you as a brand, is that all of your stories, we follow analytics in a very, very detailed level. and use AI to understand viewing patterns and understand how people's interests are shifting, where people are more, what kind of images or what kind of components in your story people might be more interested in or more sensitive to. So all of these, we gather this information, and both the storyteller becomes better by understanding these patterns. And also, we can start serving viewers stories that are deeply connected to their interests and values profile. So this is Into. The best way to learn more about Into is to, well, first of all, if you have a smartphone in your hand right now, you just have to point the camera to the QR code in the screen, and a few seconds later, you will be downloading the Into Viewer. When you have the Into Viewer in your phone, you just have to take a snapshot of this sample product, Patagonia provisions, and then you'll get the story about these regenerative lentils and the farmer and everything that goes with them. Otherwise, you can visit our website, lookin.to. I also shared, Carlene will be sharing with you a website there where we have displayed all the images, all the stories of the companies that are a part of our Pioneer Brand program. You are all invited to be a part of this. Besides the free trial that we offer to everyone, our program for Pioneer Brands is still open. And by visiting Into, you can get all the information you need to be a part of it. So yes, this is Into, and thanks so much for this space.
Thank you, Pablo. Nicely done. And I hope people will take a peek at it. It's again, storytelling. This is what this whole webinar series is about. This is what our Institute's all about. Now, speaking of storytelling, we've got a couple of very important stories to share with you today. With us are James Wren and Jeremy Smith. I'm going to introduce you guys. We have a quick poll, and then we'll begin with James. So James has been in the world of retail for over a decade. He's cut his teeth primarily actually on the side of multinational CPGs. He moved over to the buying side with Walmart.com. His first foray into the world of food was really with developing a premium better for you private label program for Walmart e-commerce. And it was the perfect kind of intersection of his own personal passion for food coupled with his professional experience and skills. And then at Thrive, James leads the branded food categories of snacks, bars. This is a long list, James. Condiments and sauces. I don't need to tell you it's a long list. Condiments and sauces, grains, pasta and bread, soups, meal and side dishes, canned and packaged foods. So if you're in one of those spaces, you're in luck. And if you're not, I have a feeling James will know how to direct you. So James, thank you for joining us, and we welcome you. Jeremy Smith has had over 35 years in strategic scales, branding and marketing. His senior management and graphics art resume is, really like a salute to the country's most iconic brands. Think Apple, I hate to say it, but Chobani, you might have heard of them. Just joking. That competitive reflex, what can I say? But obviously an awesome national brand. Crave Jerky, Bob's Red Mill, Pop Chips. Prior to Launchpad, Jeremy was co-founder of Level One, where he had relationships with buyers, marketers, strategists, VCs, designers. Obviously, a real in the center of the hub with fantastic connections into the food industry. He was named to Forbes and Circle Up's 2017 top catalyst deal makers and influencers in our space. So we're really fortunate to have you. Thank you, Jeremy. And I should also mention both James and Jeremy have been regular presenters at Bob's Natural Products webinars and seminars. So we're really delighted to have you both here. Let's flash up the quick poll that we've got. Carlene, if you can do that. So today, not a lot of questions. We'd just like you to fill out right now. One, do you have prior or current big CPG and or retail experience? So I guess big is up to you to define. And then have you ever partnered with any retailers? this will just help inform these folks. So if you could just take the next 15 seconds to check those boxes, and 10 seconds and 5 seconds. And go ahead, Carlene. Let's see what this group says. So 2/3 of us have big CPG or retail, more perhaps relevantly, 1/3 have none. Again, same numbers, 2/3 have partnered and about 1/3 haven't. So that's a great profile. Let's go ahead and close that out, Carlene. So James, welcome. We'll start off with you.
Thanks, Gary. Honored to be here. Thanks for having me, as well as with Bob and also Jeremy. So as Gary mentioned, I'm the senior category manager at Thrive Market for branded food. In case you guys don't know what Thrive is today, I actually put together a couple slides just to kind of take you through high level. But for the most part, I want to kind of keep it as much of an open conversation. So I'll flash through these slides pretty quick, and then we'll kind of take it from there. Cool. So Thrive Market, we are an online membership club for healthy living. So primarily e-commerce grocery, I would say, is our business. We do about, I would say about 70% of our business is coming from food. Members pay approximately $5 a month or $60 per year, sort of in line with some of these other subscription services that I think most of us today are subscribed to. And really, the membership gives them access to healthy products that we source from all over the planet, from organic pantry to supplements to beauty. We have a frozen meat and seafood offering that we only source from ethical sources, eco-friendly home, and also biodynamic wine. And we deliver everything fast, free, and sustainably. Well, free with a $49 minimum, but sort of the our whole fulfillment and sort of shipping experience is part of the Thrive membership. Everything is kind of carefully packed into as small of a space as possible to reduce the carbon footprint. We use all recycled and recyclable, again, packaging. We use zero waste fulfillment at all our fulfillment centers, and we only use ground shipping to make sure that we're sort of delivering on a carbon neutral promise. And our assortment is super curated. I'll kind of dive into a little bit more in terms of how the numbers shake out, but we really focus on making sure that, you know, we are not another everything store. There are plenty of those out there. We try to curate only the top products from high quality brands, big and small. And we personalize the shopping experience to every single one of our members. So when you're signing up, you're immediately shown this kind of quiz, sort of asking you, you know, what are you interested in from a dietary perspective, from maybe even a values perspective. And then from there, we curate down what you see every day when you enter Thrive, whether through the app or through the website, from specific recommendations of products down to customized collections, and even sort of personalizing the aisles and categories that you will see as a member when you enter. And we also lean in heavy with content, hoping to inform and inspire. Something as basic as recipes and sort of DIY projects that you can do at home. But we really love talking about our sourcing stories from both our branded side and also private label. And we do have a Instagram live stories feature where we try to bring on interesting guests, whether they're celebrity chefs, whether they are, you know, a part of the industry, and just kind of create a bit more of a conversation within the community. When you shop on Thrive, you're able to filter by over 100 different diet and value filters to find what you're looking for. So on the diet and health side, really kind of the obvious ones, such as organic, vegan, but keto's in there, paleo's in there. We even have anything down to no sugar or even specifically low sugar for items that are under 5 grams of sugar per serving. And then over to the social and environmental side, we've been trying to become a bigger advocate for regenerative. So that's one of the values I see on there as well. But women owned, fair trade, plastic free, BIPOC owned, a ton of values that we kind of put our stamp behind to try to make sure that we're bringing not just the best products to the members, but also bringing the best brands out into the market. Ultimately, this all ladders up to our mission, which is to make healthy living accessible to all. And this also includes for those who can't afford a membership. So we have a Thrive Gives program where for every paid membership that we get, we donate one to a less fortunate family so that they also have access to these incredible products. And just to give you kind of a breakdown of how our membership base looks, it's 87% women. The majority of them are under $100,000 households. And we over-index in the Midwest and also the Southeast. And about half of our members all have children in the household. I will also add to the fact that coming this summer, approximately June or July, we are planning to open a third fulfillment center. Today, our fulfillment centers are in Batesville, Indiana, which does about 70% of our volume, and then also Reno. But we are opening a third one up in Northeast Pennsylvania, really to kind of, not just satisfy the fact that half of our membership base are in these two large regions, but also kind of be a little bit closer to also the Northeast and also sort of the Eastern Seaboard as well. And yeah, that's it. So from here, I mean, let's have a conversation.
Oh, you're muted, Bob. We're all doing that to each other.
Yeah. Yeah. So, James, here are some of the initial questions coming in, and then I have some of my own. But one is, what do you base your criteria on the products that you're going to offer to consumers?
I mean, obviously the values are sort of table stakes, right? At the very least, products need to be non-GMO. And then everything else is sort of like an added benefit to it. Beyond that, I will say it's not so different from what maybe any other buyer would look for, which is this a product that's going to add value to my assortment and ultimately to the shopper? Especially today, to kind of give some context into what has happened in the last year. About this time last year, give or take, maybe a month further back, we came into 2020 with approximately 10,000 plus unique SKUs on site. At that time, we were already being told by our supply chain partners that we need to cut down on the assortment. It's creating some level of inefficiency in the operation, which I'm sure everyone in the CPG industry understands, where you always get yelled at by supply chain to keep it together. Now, that was fine. That was something we were going to work on in 2020. But then, as we all know, the pandemic hit, and that created an incredible spike in our business. I mean, our first couple of weeks, we saw anywhere from 200 to 400% comp versus a prior year. And it really put a strain on our operational capacity. And that's where that like 10,000 plus items really became an issue. Fast forward now, or I guess the same time 1 year later, we have a little over 1 million members. We started last year with about 600,000. So demand is still very high. I most recently cut down the assortment from 10,000 to under 5,000. So kind of with all of that in context, when I'm looking at products and brands, I need to absolutely make sure that they are going to be a heavy hitter from a sales perspective and also deliver for me on margin. Without sort of the business fundamentals tied up, that there's no way that we can continue to fuel the mission. And those are kind of the basics that I kind of look for, right? Unique item, fits into the limited assortment that I have, delivers on both top line and bottom line, and ultimately, makes sense for everyone, including the member.
And I just want to clarify something important, James. When you talked about what you carry, do you literally mean a product needs to be verified non-GMO and or organic, or do you mean broadly like clean ingredients, natural, et cetera?
So in terms of the non-GMO, requirement. It doesn't need to be project verified, but I do need from the brand perspective to say that from their manufacturing certification or anywhere that it is non-GMO. Same with organic. Well, organic, you need to have the certification no matter what. And then beyond that, as we do the review, and ingredient deck is one of the pieces we review. We do have a sort of a no-nos list that we will reference, and then from there we kind of circle back to the brands to let them know.
Great. A few people have asked, what's the best way for a small supplier to partner up with Thrive Market? A few people remarked, they've gone on the main site, they've clicked on the link, supplied information, and then really haven't heard back from anyone, right?
Yeah.
So what is that the best way to do it? And then how persistent and what's the best way to be persistent?
Sure. So that link from the site takes you to Range Me, which is where we'd like to keep all the submissions through. So at least you're sort of a record of it. Now, I certainly can I have empathy for what the question is, because as Gary had mentioned, I had been on the CPG side for a number of years as a salesperson, oftentimes kind of struggling to figure out what my buyer wanted, and sometimes even spending a little too much money or time on getting it through. So I certainly understand the challenges there. What I often recommend is, persistence is kind of the key, in my opinion. The reality is that at Thrive, or really just any other retailer, the buyer has a lot of touch points that they need to manage. For instance, for myself, when I go into Range Me, I see, I think the number that I saw the other day when I went in was like 1,400 submissions or something. So there's a lot that I need to sift through, is the fact of the matter. But I would say that persistence is at least from my perspective is appreciated. Either hopefully I see it that day. Worst case scenario, I unfortunately will miss it. But it's
So tell us where you work out. Where do you work out, James? That's what people want to know. If I could just jump in here, the question that Bob posed was really in two parts. One was what you just answered. The other is, if you're an existing vendor, there's a few people wondering, how best to tell their story to your end users.
Absolutely. In terms of just to the members, or just like to kind of sell through?
Yeah.
Well, I think sell through, what's important, especially given, the context I mentioned earlier around sort of the limited assortment, is helping us understand how your brand and ultimately your product fits into the overall assortment, right? So what is its role in the category? Is it priced to be sort of like an OPP item to kind of get people to enter the category who never shopped there before? Is it meant to be something more premium, where it's on the higher end, or maybe even the highest price item, and sort of the strategy there is to drive category growth for the retailer just through sheer dollars? Is it meant to sort of add sort of a new sort of branch to the category and hopefully introduce like a whole new set of products? That piece, I think, needs to be understood. And I think that comes across in having some level of category insights. If you're already in other retailers, also sharing some level of like kind of a category deep dive into like, what did the brand and product do at that category, at that retailer's category? Did it drive incremental share for them across the market? Did it sort of step change the growth of their category compared to the category at other competitors? That all is sort of important in sort of understanding holistically what is it going to do.
Hey, James, a crux issue for a lot of suppliers is fitting your pricing and margin model.
Absolutely.
So can we get specific here in terms of, what you might be looking for
Yeah.
everyday low cost or price, and then what your margin requirements are, so people can be thinking about how they can make this work.
Yeah. So if you go on site, you might see something that says at Thrive Market, members can expect to pay 25 to 50% lower than national MSRPs. Now, if you've been in the retail game long enough, you realize that that's pretty difficult promise to manage. So to expand on that, I will say that that percentage also includes our private label assortment against their national brand equivalents. So when I look at specifically at my branded assortment, we're closer to approximately, I would say, about 15 to 20%, sometimes even 10% off of national MSRPs. So that's what we want our compare to price to show. Our actual price to show against the compare to price is approximately 10 to 20% off of whatever that suggested MSRP is. In terms of margin targets, I think if you come in somewhere in the mid 40s, you're going to be good to go.
And I guess the related question is any degree of flexibility in that, or are you pretty firm on that in terms of both margin and that level of discounting?
We're pretty firm on it, frankly, because especially on the pricing piece, because our members will ultimately they will challenge us and they will call us out for it. So, we need to serve them. That's who keeps the lights on for us, so to speak. On the margin piece, I don't want to say there's no flexibility, but if we're asking for somewhere in the mid 40s and we're coming in at the 20s, that's probably going to be an issue. But
that's a wide degree of flexibility.
Yeah. So we have a conversation about it, but in terms of, there's certainly some flexibility, I think, within a couple points to try to make it work for the category. But it's as sort of like a guiding benchmark, that's a good place to aim for.
And I guess, related to that is, do people typically have identical items on your site that they're selling in bricks and mortar retailers? Or is it a little more like Amazon where they might have bundles or different configurations?
We sell a little bit closer to what you see at brick and mortar. So excuse me. That's
one of our listeners.
I was gonna say,
no,
that was me.
Hello, caller. No. Yeah. So we don't. We don't. Our assortment isn't focused around having like a bundle or sort of a multi-pack type of strategy that, say, like Amazon or even like a Walmart.com might even have. We tend to sell the pack that you will see at brick and mortar.
Okay.
Yeah.
And maybe you can spend a minute on temperature states, right? So right now you're largely shelf stable, ambient.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned having some frozen products.
Mm-hmm.
Where might refrigerated be in that mix? Any expected timing, if at all? And then your plans to expand frozen.
Sure.
And James, let me just interrupt and just say, process-wise, we'll do another about 2 minutes of these for now, and then switch to Jeremy, and then keep the questions coming, because then the last half hour we'll come back to a lot of these issues.
Cool.
Thanks.
No problem. In terms of refrigerated, no plans at this time. We're just sort of dipping our toes into an expanded frozen assortment. So yeah, I mean, the current frozen assortment is just meat and seafood, as you see today, with a couple of frozen meal options. I think maybe 1 or 2 brands. In terms of sort of this next phase of frozen, we're really just taking in, call it like the top 100, 150 that you must have within the frozen assortment, to kind of pulse that into sort of the ecosystem, see how the member responds, understand get some learnings from it, frankly, from the whole operational logistics side of it. And then when we go into phase number 2 is when we'll start going direct with, in terms of like reaching out to various brands with frozen. But unfortunately with refrigerated at this time, we just don't have that capability.
All right, so maybe the last question for now is, if it's not a state secret, what's your level of private label, and
Yeah.
where might you be going with private label?
So today the share of private label is around the low 30s. We have aspirations to get it up to, we'll call it 40, maybe a little higher. That's kind of where like I think the sweet spot would be for the assortment. And with that, it does affect sort of how we decide on the branded side, right? Again, I need to reduce duplication. So as private label comes in a little bit more, it's something that we all look at to make sure that we're not too over skewed on certain items.
Great.
Right.
Hey, I'm going to ask one last question because I think it's probably quick and it covers several people. Your no-no list, is that something that you guys can share?
Absolutely. I saw that in the chat. So I will get that out to, I think, Carlene, I'll send it to.
Great.
She can filter it out.
Yeah, perfect. We'll put it up. We'll attach it to this. Great. Well, thank you. We'll be back obviously with more questions, and because they're really coming in here. Cool. Jeremy, let's go to you. Welcome.
Okay, I apologize if you can hear the car honking here, but it's the same person for the last 12 months who every 3 weeks their car horn goes off and they won't get it fixed. So I apologize for that. There's a lot of randomness to it, but let me get this set up in slides. I hate Microsoft PowerPoint, but play from the start, and then I have to hit. Is it sharing?
Yeah, looking good.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, great. So let's get this going. And great presentation, James. My story's not as exciting. You would never see it on Netflix because it takes place in a warehouse. So, but very interesting story about Thrive. So thank you. And I will get this going since there's not a lot of time. So in 2019, a Goldman Sachs report came out, and John Hagen, managing director and founder of 301 Inc., was quoted in there. And I thought it was a very good quote, which is, "We are experiencing the biggest generational transition in food brand preference in our lifetime." And the reason that's important, besides the big picture, I'll just focus it on Costco, is Costco is a very transitional retailer in that they have the ability to be in and out of items and trends very quickly. In the days when the goji berries were a big item back in 2009 or so, Costco had goji berry muffins, goji berry cornbread. I mean, it was coming out of the walls, and then it died like 6 months after it started. And retailers like Safeway were stuck for 12 months with goji berries, and Costco was on to the next big thing. So that's one of the beauties of Costco, is that they have the ability to get in and out of items much more quickly than traditional retailers. And so it allows them to take advantage. They were one of the first big retailers into paleo, and now they're doing incredibly well with keto. So the old adage that leading brands are more insulated has been and continues to be generally proven false. Costco is a great example of that, where, Ling Ling pot stickers is probably one of the most famous stories that came into Costco, and no one knew who they were. And, they came out of nowhere and were the preferred Costco pot sticker for about 18 years. And then they vanished, and Costco switched, as they often do, to another brand. But those stories don't happen as much today, but where someone goes in and launches at Costco and becomes a big hit and then goes outside of Costco. But it is the type of place that with the volumes, they can really help a brand grow quickly. Costco, in my mind, and I don't want to offend any other retailers, but they're the one retailer that can fundamentally impact the course of your brand, both helping you grow the brand as well as adding significant amount of revenue, especially if you're about to sell. So Stacy's Pita Chips, when they knew they wanted to sell, made Costco a big focus for them, and was able to do almost 30 million a year at Costco, and then sold the brand. So it can be helpful in many ways besides extending your brand, and Costco definitely has a halo effect. Costco does require a lot of planning and the right strategy. You only, and we've looked at all the data, you have less than a 1% chance of actually being successful at Costco. And so what I mean by successful is being there every day. Odds are you'll be a rotational item most of the time at Costco, but the few brands that break through can do quite a bit of business at Costco over time. So you never want to be too dependent on any retailer, especially Costco, which I'll go into more detail about that along the way. And as I said, 98% of all items that go into Costco fail at gaining everyday placement. So that just really helps you think about it, because I get a lot of calls from especially younger brands. They're ready to go to Costco and they really aren't. And so, and they don't always understand the fluidness of Costco and how fast things can change there. And Costco just doesn't cancel items that are unsuccessful. They quite often cancel items that are successful. And if they're 50% of your business, that can be devastating to your brand. So you always have to be careful of that. So here's the true power of Costco. Several years ago, I don't know if you're familiar with the high-end retail store DWR, but they brought in a Herman Miller Eames lounge chairs, and those sell at retail for $5,100, almost $5,200 at DWR. I think they probably sell 1 to 2 a week, maybe. At Costco, they brought in hundreds of them. They did not get them from Herman Miller, but they bought them through a third party, blew them out at $38.99, sold out nationally in less than 2 hours. And then DWR got so upset that Herman Miller had to issue a press release to DWR kind of apologizing and said, the Costco is not an authorized Herman Miller retailer. In the old days of Costco, which, at the very beginning, the Costco really single-handedly changed the whole electronics industry. The electronics department at your average retailer, like if you're from California, like a Federated or Crazy Eddie's in New York, they went to the electronics companies. And so if you wanted to buy a 19-inch Sony Trinitron TV, which was the hot TV back then, so this was a while back, nobody ever had to price match, because the same TV was called, let's say the 3900 was called the 3900T at one store, the 3900X at another store. So they never had to match. And so shockingly, the largest Sony retailer in the United States was Macy's department stores. And so when Costco pulled off a deal, again, at the time, it was early on through gray market, and they were selling the same Sony Trinitron for 50% less than what Macy's was. Macy's created a storm, put a lawsuit together, which they lost. And then Costco really just completely changed the whole electronics scene, and the price for a television dropped down to next to nothing to what it was before. Otherwise, you'd still be paying $3,000 for a 19-inch Sony Trinitron. So there's a lot of people who I hear talk about, especially other brands, like to brag about what their sales are, and they tell people they hit it out of the park. And 90% of the time, they're doing well, and all hats off to them. But this is what hitting it out of the park looks like. $2 million per week, $100 million in annual sales, plus with one SKU. That's when you've really hit it out of the park. But it does show you the potential. If everything falls into place, you have the right match for the consumer, you've created the right value and separated your retailers, your retail pricing, and you price it at club properly. Chobani was, I hate that term unicorn, but they were an amazing brand. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later because all the Costco buyers said Chobani would never sell at Costco. So creating success at Costco is not easy. You have to have the right strategy, the right infrastructure in place. And you also have to create a supply chain that moves at the speed of Costco. If you've got a truck going into a Costco depot and it's delayed for any reason, and Costco calls you, hopefully you call Costco and notify them before they call you. But they'll call you. They don't expect an hour, a response back from you in 24 to 48 hours. The buyers expect you to respond within an hour or two. And if you don't, they'll be calling you right away. Or if you're fortunate enough to have a broker, they'll be calling me and yelling at me. And we did have that happen one time on Christmas Day. A buyer who will be not named, because I've had plenty of battles with her, as many people have, just went off on me on Christmas Day about the fact that the truck didn't arrive when it was supposed to, and we didn't call her back in 25 minutes. So you really have to be prepared. And this can be very disruptive, whether you have a co-packer or whether you have your own plant, because when Costco places an order, for like 10 truckloads, and you get that order, if that's it and you're just a rotation, that really disrupts the business at your plant or at your co-packer, and you may not have another order for a while. Or if you're an ongoing item like a Chobani and your sales start to really take off, you have to have the structure in place, because Costco's basic philosophy is, if you can't meet demand, I'll find somebody who can.
We know her name, Jeremy. It's Ebenezer. So.
That's right. That's right. So I want to talk a little bit about the impact of the pandemic, because this is really important to understand at Costco. One of the things that we did at the very beginning of this is we engaged with a lot of the doctors at Stanford to try and get inside data on what they thought was going to happen, because we had items that were doing 1,200 a week during prior to the pandemic that were only doing $300 or $400 a week during the pandemic. And as you can see from the shelf, this is on the left side, this picture, you can see toiletries. This entire rack is empty, which a Costco buyer and a Costco building manager never ever want to see empty racks at Costco, because that means they're not making any money. But so what was happening is everybody was going in and grabbing the essential items, and especially the emerging brands got hurt. Even companies like Annie's and some of the other ones that dominate their category saw huge sales increases with Kraft Macaroni and Cheese and Pepperidge Farm as consumers began to switch some of the products they were buying. And of course, the product demos and roadshows were gone and have been replaced by talking demos, which, if you've ever been in a Costco and walked by one of the demos, talking is not the strength of most of the demo people there. So tasting the product and someone saying, wow, this is the most incredible risotto I ever had, leads right to sales. But talking demos and just handing out the product and letting the consumer walk out with it is not really an effective way to demo. And so then you're really left with TPDing, which is couponing. And couponing is, I'm against it, because I don't think it really places a lot of value on the brand. And there's a lot of members at Costco that only shop on coupons, and you can't count on them to be regular consumers. But it's a little bit different right now, and a lot of our clients are new ones, because we work with a lot of smaller emerging brands, have postponed their launches at Costco for 8 to 12 months. So, and I think in some cases that's very smart, because if you don't have a lot of distribution, then you really need the demos more than you would otherwise. And without demos, it's really hard to get some stickiness with the Costco members. There's also less Costco members in the warehouse. And so there was, in California alone, at one point, Costco was only allowed to have 25% of its normal membership in a building at a single time. So that kind of covers that. It's starting to get a little bit better, but I think as more and more people get the vaccine, we're probably looking full recovery in 2022 at Costco is my belief, but there's no talk yet of when the old demos are coming back. Important thing to remember is that Costco is an operationally driven model. You don't go water skiing with these people. You don't spend an hour talking to James if he'll speak with you, and you don't have any relationships with the buyers that you would have with a traditional retailer. They frown upon that, and they're not allowed to go to dinner with you. Sometimes they can on a plant tour, but they have to pay individually. So there's a real difference between how it's sold, and it's really about creating the right palette, the right packaging, the right size, because everything is about volume at Costco. And the worst thing you can do is if you lose pennies at Safeway, you're fine. If you lose pennies at Costco's before you know it, you're down $75,000 in a quarter. So their volume is just so huge that you have to really be careful with it. And it takes a lot of time. I always have clients that come to me and say, I'm ready to go, blah, blah, blah. And I said, no, it takes at least 90 days. I've never had anyone get their pricing and all of their stuff in place in under 90 days. But everybody thinks they can. Building managers also are really important. Getting to know the building managers is important because they really have this final say on where your product gets placed. Obviously, if you're a cooler item, you're going to go into the cooler department. But like with 5 Hour Energy, because it sold really well, the building managers and the merch manager would move it all around the store. So it would force the consumer to go to different sections of Costco to try and find 5 Hour. And they do that a lot with the top selling brands that have the biggest draw. Buyers are rotated in and out of the category. So your buyer today that brought you in, they have a great say in helping you grow your brand. But when they're out of that department, the next buyer can come in and just say, hey, thank you for your business. I'm moving to your competitor, or I'm bringing in another item. And there's not a lot you can do about it. I've been in that situation before where clients then go over the head of the buyer, and the buyers have great ways of paying you back when you go over their head, and it ain't pretty. And they'll put you in all the C buildings for your test, and because Costco has A buildings, B buildings, and C buildings. So it's important to know that the buyer is not your friend. No matter how many brokers tell you they're friends with the buyers, it's a bunch of baloney. And that's why I always say brokers and brands kind of struggle with this, because they'll say, oh yeah, I got a great relationship with Rachel, and then their item gets canceled. Costco is always loyal to the member first, not the brands. I talked a little bit earlier, Costco is great at being a sales halo. That was big for Chobani when they were first coming out to the West Coast, and some retailers didn't want to bring them in right away. As soon as they saw them in Costco, Safeway picked up the phone and called and said, hey, how come we don't have Chobani? One other thing is that, in the US, Costco has 8 US regions. And what's cool about that is that if, let's say you're a brand out of Austin, Texas, and you're really small, $1 million in sales, $500,000 in sales, I'm not saying you should go into Costco, but if all things check out, you don't have to go into all buildings. We've worked with brands where you only go into 1 or 2 buildings for your first year. And then after that, Costco is willing to grow with you as long as you hit the sales thresholds. Let me move this out of the way. So an overview of Costco quickly, which I accidentally moved this slide way down. 166 billion in sales, 558 US warehouses, 803 warehouses worldwide, which they're really starting to grow quickly outside of the US. Quick comparison, 3,700 SKUs is where they like to be. Sometimes they'll go up as high as 4,300. And then in the old days, Jim Sinegal would come in and go, take it out, 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 take it out. And then the buyers would call you and say, Jim Sinegal just walked into the building and I have to cut 19 SKUs. So, and he still goes into the buildings, even though he's semi-retired. Average markup on an item is 11%. 14% is the max, except for Kirkland Signature. Kirkland Signature, they try and get, which is their house brand, is private label is about, they'll go up to 15%. And then KS items now make up 25% of the items today, which Kirkland Signature items are becoming the #1 competitor for brands, and they're taking up a lot of space. When Craig Jelnick took over as CEO, he made KS a much greater focus than Jim Sinegal had previously, and they become much more aggressive on dominating categories. In fact, in the bar category, Kirkland Signature pretty much does about 70% of the sales now. So it's a much tougher entry into the bar category. Just quickly, if you look up at the signs, it's something you should get familiar with when you walk into a Costco. So you can see the number at the top is usually the item number. And then if it's an everyday item, you'll see a white sign usually, and it says, in this case, $11.99. If you see an off number, it means it's probably being marked down. If you see a green sign, it means the item is organic. And then if you see an asterisk at the top, the item is being deleted. Now, that doesn't mean that the brand is being deleted. They might be bringing in another flavor, or they might be rotating into another brand. But anytime you see an asterisk on there, it means change is coming. Could be an upsize, it could be a deletion. Things to consider when selling to Costco. To become a regular item, you must sell at least 1,500 a week per warehouse in most categories. Although yogurt, that's what the number used to be, but it's much closer to $3,000 now a week per warehouse. And so it's much tougher for smaller brands. Chobani really changed the sales numbers in the category. When we brought them in the first year, they were doing 1,500 a week per warehouse in the Midwest, which was the first region they launched in. By the second year, when people really knew who the brand was, they were doing $6,000 a week, and they were outselling in the Midwest cigarettes, eggs, and milk. And so there are certain categories that are a little bit tougher because the thresholds are so high for you to get in as a regular item, and you really need to work with your broker, or if you're going directly to Costco, to understand these things. Because if your item doesn't upsize well into a larger club pack, I always knew kale chips would never become that successful at Costco, because no one's going over to your buddy's house to watch the Super Bowl and eat a 29-ounce bag of kale. It's just, it doesn't happen. And so you got to know that as a brand, how your brand upsizes, because if you don't, when you go in there, you're going to fail, and all that work was a waste of time. You also have to be able to pick up both the Whole Foods customer and the Kroger Safeway customer. If you don't get both of them, that consumer, it will be really difficult for you to do $1,500 to $2,000 a week. You still may be a rotational item, but if your goal is to become an everyday item, you need to capture both of them, because Costco doesn't pick up enough of the Whole Foods or the Erewhon customer in order, normally to make that much of a impact on the sales. So you kind of need to capture both of those Costco members in order to have a really solid item in there. Other things to consider is regional distribution. If it's light in the region you're going into, don't go into that region because you'll generally, our data shows your sales will generally be off somewhere between 22 and 30% when people don't know who your brand is at Costco, because Costco is really a value sale. So somebody goes out and they buy it at Safeway and they see it there and they go, wow, this is great, I love this. But then they go into Costco and they go, oh, I love that item. I got to buy a 37,000 dozen pack, but I'm saving, $2 an ounce. So it's worth it. But if you don't have that separation and people don't have that comparison, you generally won't achieve the higher end of the sales. Then, flavor is really important. A lot of times brands will listen to the buyer and they'll bring apricot in. Apricot is probably the #1 most failed brand flavor that people bring in, because there's a couple of buyers in the Northeast that love apricot, and not one of those items ever sells. And there was this one vendor that came to me, and I knew she had a 36-week supply in the Northeast of Costco of product. That means it was going to take them 36 weeks to sell through, because I was waiting to go in next. And the buyer told me, yeah, I've got this apricot item that won't sell. And so the client said, yes, that's us. And we actually took over that brand's business from the other broker, and we sold the right item in, and it did $1,500 a week, which was 8 times as much as it sold in the Northeast in the Bay Area. So we found the right demographics, the right buyer to go in with, the right flavor. But one of the things that Chobani did really well, and we learned as a company so much from them, was they said no to Costco quite a bit. Like a buyer came to us with an idea of taking what, I want vanilla in a 12 pack. Plain in a 12 pack, little of a 5-ounce cups. And Chobani said, no one's going to buy that. You're selling it in a pint. Why are they going to buy this? It won't be price competitive. And she said, well, if you don't do it, I'll go to the competitor. And Chobani said, go to your competitor. And the item had to be marked down. They were stuck with it for almost 6 months. But you know what? In the end, the buyer will always remember that Chobani knew what they were talking about, even if she didn't like them and was upset that her plain pack of little cups didn't sell.
I have to laugh. 20 years ago, we launched 3 SKUs at Costco. One of them was apricot mango.
Oh, there you go.
To your exact point, it was
Yeah.
not there very long. So we got about 2 minutes before we get to we got a lot of questions for you. So.
Okay, this will be my last slide then, I guess.
Your call.
Tell me if I have more time after I get through this slide. So this is a hopeful message and a reminder that buyers are not always right. So these are quotes from actual buyers at Costco. Costco members will never purchase Chobani Greek yogurt with fruit basically in the cup. Costco will never be a destination for organic food. You'll never see Crave jerky at Costco, and Stacy pita chips are not a Costco item.
Keep going. You got a little bit more time.
Okay, so this is probably the most important slide, because most brands don't do this. And brokers don't like rehearsing for some reason, but you have to rehearse. And buyers are going to ask you questions at Costco that they don't ask at other retailers, like, well, where does your milk come from? What type of cows? Really? What type of grass do they eat? What, how long do you store that for? And it's really important that you spend the time getting it right, and that when you select a broker, that you have somebody who understands the difference. Because you look at 8 regions, each region in the US, they're all culturally different. So you've got to change your presentations based on which buyer you're going into. I had a meeting with a client about 2 years ago, and I warned him not to give the buyer the PowerPoint presentation, because this buyer always rips right to the pricing page, doesn't read anything else. I said, don't do that. First thing we do, he gets in the meeting, hands it off, gives it to the buyer. She goes in there, but I know the buyer, and she just starts, this is way too priced. I want a 36 pack and blah, blah, blah. And he was like getting hit by a Mike Tyson punch. He was down. He couldn't even speak. He was stuttering. And finally I said, because I knew she was a big Red Sox fan, I said, how do you like what those Red Sox are doing this year? I told this story because of Bob. And so, and all of a sudden her demeanor changed. I got her off of talking about pricing, and then we just engaged in a conversation. But that's a case where I rehearsed endlessly with a buyer. I mean, with a CEO of a founder of a company, and he still went off on his own and lost track, because they know how to trip you up in the meetings. And especially the Bay Area, they like to show up 15 minutes late to the meeting to try and see if they can throw you off. But if you've done your homework, we work with Urban Remedy, and Paul Coletta is probably the best CEO I've ever seen in a meeting. Doesn't need a PowerPoint, knows everything frontwards and backwards, doesn't have to be the star of the meeting, and just engages in a conversation. By the time you're done, you're hearing the one thing you want to hear. I'll have POs to you on Monday.
That's great. I think I do need to pause here, Jeremy. Let me say before Bob throws a bunch of questions at you, and then we bring James back in, to everybody. Something you didn't mention, of course, I know that there's a lot you didn't mention, but Costco was for Stonyfield probably one of our greatest partners in the sense that we learned so much from the audits. What you just said a second ago about how it's produced, where it's produced, I mean, they drilled in ways that organic, certifiers, kosher, USDA, FDA never did. And it was great. We got so much. By the second audit, we were 100 times better than the first. And by the next audit, we were even better. So I just have to say, this is who you're dealing with. Obviously, that cuts both ways. If you fall short on that audit, you're not going to be in there very long. But just know that's how thorough they are. So Bob, why don't you go ahead with a couple questions.
So Jeremy, even though we asked you to stop with your slides, this one is pretty important. And so why don't you walk through the whole value at cost and how that fits with the margin band, that 11 to 14% you discussed, and how people should think about that.
Yeah. So again, these are not my rules. These are Costco rules. I don't necessarily agree with them, but the value at cost, Costco, when they look at your pricing, they used to focus on value at retail, which is what almost every brand that wants to present. When you tell them at first that Costco is looking for a 20% value at cost, the first thing they hear is, oh, that's easy, because they're thinking value at retail. So the value at cost is the FOB per ounce price you're selling to Costco for compared to the distributor, or if you're selling directly to the retailer, whoever's getting your lowest price out of those two options, that's Costco's starting negotiating point. Then after that, then there's the value compared to the rest of the category. So you could come in and say, I got a great value at 23% off of what we normally sell to UNFI for. But then the buyer tells you, well, Stonyfield has an even better price. And so that's the secondary value at cost. But that's the first thing you have to sit down and look at, because it impacts everything. It's going to determine, getting that value cost is going to help you determine what pack size to be in. Because the last thing you want to be in is a pack size that doesn't get you to the 20% value at cost and doesn't get you to the right margins that you need, but also the margins that Costco needs. So if you start with the value at cost and looking at that, that will help you understand what your margins are going to be looking like. And generally, anyone who is above a 16% margin at Costco on an item is not going to be very competitive. Costco still may want you, but generally you need to be down into the single digits or low teens in order to really be competitive on your margins. And that's another reason some smaller companies in the beginning go to Costco too early, and they really don't have the buying power to get to those numbers.
And then the third point on that same slide about Costco not wanting to be more than 20 to 25% of your business, every brand I know has been made into liars by claiming that qualification.
Well, I won't represent somebody that isn't honest about it, because it can jeopardize their business. And first of all, that's the hard rule if you look at it. But I know with a certain yogurt company that we worked with, that, and Costco understands this. In the beginning, when you walk in the door, you need to know, hey, I'm at 12% right now. As the business grows, we could get higher. Costco understands there's going to be fluctuation as the business grows. When we were working with Hope Foods, we had no idea we were going to do $8 million our first year. The company was doing about 12.5 million in sales at the time. This was a long time ago. They're much bigger now. So the buyers just said, bring me a plan to show me over the next 12 months how you're going to get there. So they'll work with you on it, but it is an important lesson, because let's say they become 40% of your business and they cancel your item, which is what happened to Mrs. Mays. Mrs. Mays used to be the only nut crunch item at Costco, and it was like 45%. Costco was 45% of their business. Costco said, we're coming out with a Kirkland signature and we're discontinuing you. And we said, how much time do we have? And luckily they had 6 months, and we developed a bar item that they brought in. But you need to protect your business, and Costco's looking out for you that way. And there's always stories about people who don't follow that rule. And Costco's really doing it to protect you. They're not doing it to create, make you jump through hoops. But that's a good point. Thanks, Bob.
And Jeremy, importantly, going back to the pricing and value, is the 14% margin markup over cost or gross margin on selling price?
It's gross margin on selling. So the one thing about Costco is that if sometimes brands will think, well, I'm going to cut this by another 2%, and Costco will pass the savings off. They don't, and Costco will actually, make more money off of it. They just pass all the savings on to the members. So you're not helping anybody by offering them a greater offering like that. So it really depends. And in some categories, they'll take 11 or 10%. They don't like to. They did that a lot early on when they had their organic initiative, where for the first time they were willing to really take lower margins. Of course, Costco's like Vegas. The house always wins. They'll make it up somewhere else on you, like charging you for end caps, which I just want to quickly bring that up. A lot of people give Costco end cap dollars, and you should never offer that to them. Let them ask you for it, because the secret at Costco is everybody gets free end caps in the beginning. So don't offer them. If it doesn't sell in the first 2 to 4 weeks, you'll lose those end caps, but you can always go back to them and say, hey, I'd like to do some end caps.
Let me just, folks, we've got about 17 questions and about 20 minutes. So feel free, both of you, to eyeball. There's some very specific questions for you, James, and for you, Jeremy. Feel free to knock those off, but Bob, we'll just keep going, and we'll just kind of go back and forth here.
So Jeremy, the example you used of $1,500 a week as a threshold for dairy or refrigerated or yogurt, what's the range across other categories and other, say, temperature states? Because that's pretty daunting.
Yeah, so yogurt category, dairy is closer to 2,500 now, but like when you get into cookies and things like that, it's closer to below 1,000 on some of them. Shelf stable, like rices and meal kits are less because they sell lower volume anyway. So those are closer to 800 to 1,100. The chip category is just brutal. So, the way the buyer looks at it is, if I can bring in another tortilla chip for $1,500, that'll do $1,500 to $2,500 a week. Why am I going to bring in your kale chip that'll do $600 a week? So you got to kind of get in their shoes and think about things.
Great. And just a real basic question, what's the rough split of Costco members who are consumers versus, say, small businesses who are just sort of doing cash and carry?
That's really changed. And I don't have the latest numbers on that, because Costco's really started to expand the business centers now. They're trying to get the business business group focused on other types of items. And if you walk into, like here where we are, there's a business center in Hayward. They have more restaurant style items and more convenience store type items and different pack sizes, much larger bags. I don't remember what the percentage is, but it's I would be surprised if the business side of the world is more than 25 or 30% of the business.
Okay. Here's one you might not have heard before. You have a great meeting with Costco. You're getting every positive sign of encouragement, references to filling out new item paperwork, and then the buyer goes dark.
Oh, as soon as you said goes dark, I know exactly what you're talking about. Is it Brian? Never mind, I shouldn't mention his name. But it's a common problem at Costco that Costco, I will tell you a quick story. I had a very fun time with a buyer. I was on the road for a plant tour for 2 days, and we talked about this. And he's an old school buyer, has been there since Costco had one building. And I told him, I asked him this question about this. I said, why is it that some of the buyers are so hard to get hold of? And he said, I don't know. He said, I hear about it. People sometimes call me and complain about it. But I will tell you what is probably a lot of clients are surprised to hear. Sometimes you have to call 42 times in 3 days to get hold of the buyer. And you have to learn, like I know a couple of buyers in the Bay Area come in from Tracy, which with traffic can be a 2-hour drive. So they get in at 6 a.m. So sometimes I have to get up at 5:45 and start calling them. Most organizations that have a sales team aren't going to do that. But your broker should. And it's a very difficult situation. Now, there is one situation that can help you, and that is if the buyer happens to be the assistant buyer that's going dark, you can call the regular buyer and just cry and just say, hey, I've been trying to get hold of Billy. Is he okay? Did something happen to him? Did he change departments? He was so excited about this item. And if the buyer knows nothing about your item, it ain't going anywhere because the buyer still looks at it. So, and you can also always, if you build relationships with the ICSs or the inventory control specialists, I always call them and go, hey, do you have the paperwork on item 65342 yet? And he goes, I don't even have a 6432 yet. Now I know I'm really screwed because no one's even submitted for an item number yet. So those are some of the things, if you have a good broker, they know about these things. And they should advise you, don't get excited when you go to the meeting with certain buyers, because there's certain buyers that say yes at every meeting. And buyers do not approve items generally. Buyers approve them to you and say, hey, I want to move forward with this. But then they have to go to their GMM, who may come back and tell you something ridiculous like, even though you're a dairy product, well, I've seen a similar product in shelf stable and it's 50% less. Why are you so expensive? So you got to really focus on that's all part of strategy. And there's just some buyers that are dark for 6 months.
Jeremy, how receptive is Costco to new items? Are they not new items, but like new concepts? Does something have to be proven elsewhere, or will they take a chance on something they really like?
That's a very good question. It depends on the category and who the buyer is. The younger buyers have a tendency to want to break through and come up with something new. The buyers that have been there a long time are like, I've seen everything. Yeah, bring it back to me when you're in blah, 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 blah. But you have to know that about that buyer. And so like, if I know I'm going to a senior buyer like that, that's going to probably blow me off because I'm bringing him a kale chip, it's my fault if I don't come up with the right pitch to them and explain to them why they need to look at this. And part of it is, like, I'll give you, for example, with what we did when we were turned down in every region for Chobani. We went to the Midwest region of all regions, and we showed them a map of every Whole Foods that at the time was carrying Chobani and every other retailer. And we within 1 mile of all these Costco buildings. And I said, I said to the buyer, why are you letting your Costco members, forcing them to go shop and buy Chobani over at A&P or Stop and Shop or Whole Foods? You're telling them you don't want them at Costco. And the buyer said, well, let me look at that item again. And he was the first region to bring it in. So you're in a very different position when you're Stonyfield or whether you're the new latest item that's developed this new plant-based technology.
Hey, James, Kate has a very specific question for you. Do you guys ever include free samples in your shipments?
At this time, no. We used to, but after the pandemic happened, it was a combination of sort of safety concerns for the FC workers as well as just operational capacity. So it has not been something we've been able to do in the last year, unfortunately.
So, Jeremy gave some really good coaching on sort of sell-through and bad ideas like excessive couponing. Do you have any, like top tips for folks like getting noticed?
Sure.
Yeah.
You mean when they're on Thrive?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So in general with promotion, I'm more of a frequency over depth believer. And I'll say this because in the past, like especially the past year, I think with kind of how the trends in grocery in general had kind of shifted back towards, it feels to me there's been kind of this shift back towards an appreciation for just actual food as opposed to convenience items. I've certainly seen that in my data in terms of what people are buying. And I've also seen in the data that members are kind of buying what they're comfortable with and what they know, right? So that means I tend to see, what we can call them legacy natural brands tend to sort of stay in like those top spots, even through everything that has happened in the last year. But what we have been sort of recommending to newer brands that we've brought on in the past year or so, or even older, to try to just kind of get them more exposure is the frequency over depth. We do have a number of promotional options, on the sort of the merchandising marketing side of things that include sort of marketing blast, but also some sort of promotion or some sort of giveaway. But even something more basic as just like a simple TPR, sort of the equivalent of your shelf tag at brick and mortar, moves a needle. So something we've been trying in the last few months is having brands do sort of a cadence of 2 TPRs in a cycle. So something a little more deep, say like 20-25% off for 2 weeks, maybe even include a like a homepage banner placement, or maybe like a category page banner placement. In my eyes, that's kind of the closest thing I can say that here's an end cap, or here's an opportunity for an off-shelf display. And with that, sort of that driving awareness piece, and then ultimately the TPR to make them pull the trigger. Hopefully we're driving new shoppers or new members into the brand. They're trying it for the first time. Then we take about 2 or 3 weeks off to get over the hangover of the promotion, then come back on with just like a basic 10% TPR. And with that, hopefully you're driving a repeat purchase and hopefully creating a habit from there. So we've been experimenting with that the last few months. I think by next quarter, I should start to see, sort of the effects of it, to kind of just continue to push brands into members' eyes.
Yeah, super helpful. Can I just say, Bob, before you fire your question, Jeremy and James, I think if you just click on Q&A, because I now am worried about time with the questions still coming in. I think you should be able to see them, and a couple of them are very specific for you. So go ahead,
I see it. Got it. Okay.
Okay, go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, so one of them might be one of those questions related to what Jeremy was saying about threshold velocities to keep your space. Do you have a similar threshold through your DC, whether it be units, cases, or dollars a month on an item, that something has to perform before you think about discoing it? James?
That's you, James. Yeah.
All right. Can you ask that one more time? I was reading some of the questions.
Yeah. I was so does an item need to hit a minimum units, dollars, cases per month, say through your DC, to be in the safety zone?
It's all relative to the category. Yeah, so I'm not really looking at units per store per week because we only have the one store. But but what I do lean on a lot is looking at sort of a share tracker, or at the most basic level, some sort of ranker by subcategory. And what I need to see, or to be in the safety zone, I would say you need to be within the top 80% of share and or units. Dollar and or units in share. If you're in the bottom 20%, you're going to get looked at. If you're in the bottom 10%, then I would say you definitely don't need to be there.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Hey, Jeremy, I want to go back to something I think I may have heard you say before about how your, say, 10% accrual for demos factors into your accrual your value at cost? In other words, can you build that into your cost, or is that a separate sort of trade spend?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So, just like you would build a trade spend in for any other retailer, it's pretty similar. Costco will allow you up to 10%, but the trick with it is with your value of cost and how it impacts it. If you're spending 20% out at Whole Foods and you're only spending 10% Costco, then Costco will penalize you 10% on your value at cost. So the question at that point is, and I would never recommend not telling the truth and disclosing everything, but as somebody at one of my clients once said, Costco is the only retailer you can go to jail, purgatory for telling the truth. So if you, it's pretty hard for them to figure out what your spend is unless they notice that you're doing, a buck, 10 for a buck, every 3 weeks, then they know you're spending more money. But that's one that's harder for them to figure out. But you should be conscious of that. And, the difference is if you're spending 15% at Whole Foods and you're spending 10% at Costco, that's not a lot of money. Costco tries to grab wherever they can to play things in their favor. That one you can get away with and just say it's 10%. But if it's larger than that, you can get yourself into a nasty mess. So
one thing you didn't touch on were MVMs, right? So let's say somebody is established at Costco. What should they expect as far as what they cost, and then what kind of lift might they get if they're in an MVM?
Well, Costco will tell you they lift wise, they want a 5 times lift. That doesn't happen very often, but the buyers will constantly tell you that happens all the time. For items that really sell well, like a Chobani or somebody like that, a Stonyfield, it's harder to get a big lift that like a 5 times lift. You might get a 3 times because you're already maxing out most of the consumer base. But here's the, as far as a cost, the more MVMs they do at a time, the more you can share the cost, the printing cost. If let's say they only have 3 vendors that are out there, you might have to kick in 90,000 instead of 60,000 for the printing of the MVM itself. Then you've got to knock off. Generally, they want at least 30% off for an MVM. It depends on the brand and all that stuff. They're trying to get away from couponing as much as possible, but it's a tricky thing. One thing I've noticed about Costco is they will never disclose what their true sales data is for MVMs and couponing. And I believe there's a reason. I firmly believe that there's people that just shop at Costco when an item's on coupon. And so what the most important measurement for me isn't whether it's a 6 times or a 3 times lift. It's how many new members come in and buy it and stick with you. So if let's say you're doing 1,600 a week and you do 3,200 a week on the when you're doing the MVM for 8 weeks, and then after that, do your numbers that were normally at like 1,600, do they now go to 2,200? Most of the time, I don't see them rise that much. And so then you've got to run an analysis on that, what the costs are and whether it makes sense. Now, most vendors won't do that. And there's other reasons to do an MVM if you have the money. Because when you do an MVM, you block out all the other competitors from coming into the category for a time period. And if you can do 3 a year, which Premier Bar used to be really strategic on this, they would do 3 MVMs a year. That would mean they would take up almost 6 months of the category, and no, the buyer couldn't bring in any new items because they don't want to bring in other items competing against the MVM. So
Okay.
it can be a smart tool.
Thanks. So last question is, and this is for both of you, does Thrive and Costco follow, like say, a category calendar that suppliers should be aware of in terms of when they're looking at specific categories, or is it pretty open season?
I could take that. So it is pretty open season in general at Thrive. Specifically, I can tell you in terms of bars, I'm not going to be looking at it again until the late summer, so approximately August. But aside from that, generally speaking, it is kind of open season, but we'll let you know if that changes, which is always very possible.
Yeah, so with Costco, categories like ice cream, holiday items, no matter what the holiday is, are obviously seasonally bought. Most of the other categories are fairly open because Costco wants to take advantage of what's going on in the local regions as well as national trends. So, but ice cream is probably the tougher category because they buy so early for ice cream that you need to be, your broker needs to be aware of that if you're using a broker, because if they don't get in during the right time, you'll have to wait a whole nother year.
Thanks.
Great. Listen, thank you guys. Because Jennifer got her question in a long time ago, James, I just have to ask, do you guys accept SNAP food stamps?
My gut is to say no at this time, but I want to just confirm if there's like an
Okay.
update on that information.
All right,
So-
good. Well, I just wanted to try to honor her question. So there are a couple more very specific questions for each of you. I appreciate your typing as I close us out. Thank you, guys. This was exactly what I dreamt it would be. Just really dense, really useful, really practical. Bob, especially thank you for your guidance, because you got right to the heart of the reasons people are on these webinars. Carlene, let's go to the close slides here. Let me just remind everybody that we do have, as I mentioned, 3 more webinars before we pause before the May Institute. Next week, we have 2 really innovative incubators. Of course, you've seen and heard from Elliot many times, but we've never really talked about TIG and what they do and how they can help you and be a resource to grow your brand. By the way, Bob will be doing a special 5-minute pitch at the beginning of that. And Rich Thompson, I don't know how many folks know Factory, or James or Jeremy, if you guys have run into them, but this is a really clever new way of helping brands go from, early stage to rocket ship status. And anyways, it's going to be a very interesting discussion with 2 incubators. April 7th, Seth Goldman, and we're just waiting to confirm our second, who have both done completely innovative launches during COVID, which like Nicole and Matt a couple of weeks ago, I think is always helpful and encouraging and also a good caution. And then we have 2 significant independent retailers, natural retailers, who will close out our series on April 14th. So keep an eye on those for those on your schedule. I do want to underscore, we're about to go live on Friday with our registration for this May Institute. And I'm really excited about this one. It's 3 days, not full days. You'll see they're 9 to 3:30. That's Mountain Time, I should say. But the first day is basically cash flow and financing. We got a whole ton of cases that you'll be able to submit if you'd like. Just absolutely awesome panels that day. And we also are going to have 2 fantastic stories from Denise here and Lisa, who you see who've also been conducting fundraisers right now. Capital raises right now. So that should be really interesting. On May 6th, it's telling your brand story and e-commerce. We have opportunities for 6 cases. And Danny Meyer, who I think needs no introduction, who has completely reinvented his company, as you might imagine, a restaurant-driven company during COVID. We'll talk about, we saw Danny last spring. Now he'll talk to us about what has actually happened there. And then on the 7th, that is not from the 7th to the 13th, that's on the 7th, there will be 13 companies invited to pitch. So get your pitch applications in. Again, everything's going to go live on Friday. You cannot beat the price, $50 for all 3 days. You can go ahead there and register. And I hope you'll join us for our deep dive for those days. Finally, I just want to underscore, we do have these two other opportunities. If you've got a proposition, a service, or a brand you want to share, let us have those, and we'll try to work you into the final two webinars. And lastly, again, if you've got any feedback for our panelists, our presenters, obviously their contact information has been shared here. Anything else that you'd like us to know, please don't be shy. I know nobody here is shy. Again, I can't thank our presenters enough. That was truly superb. So James, Jeremy, really well done. You guys have never, either of you clearly never done this before. But seriously, you know, we're in a very dynamic place right now, and helping to get under the hood and know what it takes to work with you, what your expectations are, what your thresholds are, is super, super critical. As ever, I want to thank Bob again for your always generous donations of your time, and of course, Carlene, who makes this whole thing work. And again, I want to thank New Hope Natural Network for being our partner, and we will see you all next week. Thank you so very much for being here. Again, thanks to the panelists.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Thank you.